Welcome to episode 20 of Civil War Breakfast Club. I am your co-host, Mary, also known as Lucretia Polk for this episode. And I am joined by the most awesome Civil War geek I know and awesome podcast co-host, Darren Weeks.
Wow, you talking about me? I was going to say, who else is here? Holy, well, welcome.
We're at episode 20, so I mean,
we are in the post-Christmas episode of the Civil War Breakfast Club, episode 20. Holy crap, man, 20 episodes. Yeah. We say this every single time, the number gets higher and higher and higher. So 20 is a good one. 20 is is a good step, and having a lot of fun. It's been a great ride, with everything we're doing. So yeah, it's great to get back and talk about battles again and talk about some of the stuff that makes us tick, as they say. And
yes. And so visiting some of these lesser known battles as we're going to be doing today. And your name my name gives away what we're going to be talking about, but so does yours especially. Don't hazen me, Murfreesboro.
That's right. Don't haze me, Murfreesboro. As we are going to be talking about Stones River, or the second Murfreesboro, if you are from parts unknown of the South, you can call it that if you like. But basically, we're going to.
As you say, or as one of our Twitter followers said, Stones Free Borough.
Stones Free Borough. Bro, God, I can talk today, But no, we're going to talk about the Battle of Stones River, okay, which is a really good one in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I think it's very similar to the Battle of Franklin, Mary, reminds me of, is it's one of those battles that has substantial importance, both political and militarily, that no one seems to study or talk about.
No.
It's the latest possible calendar battle you could have, December 31st, 1862. It spills over for a couple of days into the new year. But it's one that it's got a lot of colorful characters in it, but it's got a lot of substantial impact when you're talking about things like Chattanooga and especially Nashville. And
it is actually, we will be talking about this, the what ifs behind this battle are something that are very, very interesting. The other thing is and I know we will definitely bring this up, is why this battle might not be as well known as what it should be. And that definitely factors into it, sort of just the whole perception of how the Civil War is seen. I think this is just such a, it's kind of like Jaws. It's like when you yell, what was it, Barracuda, the people say how what, and when you yell shark, we got a panic on our hands. This is like when you say Stones River, people are kind of like, what? But if you say Gettysburg, people know what you're talking about. You're looking at me like you don't know that movie.
I was thinking maybe you banged your head or something. You were going something about Barracudas. I think I heard a niner in there.
Oh God, that quote from Jaws.
Yes, God's sake. but I think, but just so you know, Mary, I don't think that people like the whole what if thing. The serious people don't like that. But I guess
I love the whole what if thing.
I know, but we do. But I think for this one, it actually applies. I think this is one, like Antietam or some of these other ones. This is one that you can play what if, because as we get towards the end of this battle, you'll find out that if you don't know this battle, that things could have gone the other way, and it would have had substantial impact on how the battle in the West and how the West was won, as the phrase that I just invented right there.
Yep.
And you can understand how the impact of how the generals played itself out when you're going from Bragg, eventually to Johnston, eventually to Hood, and how it goes. It really, the linchpin really is Stones River when you really think about it.
It is.
And it's one of those battles. And as you look into some of these casualty numbers we'll get to and how much you'd like to talk about those, this is one that there are more casualties in this Battle of Stones River than in Antietam, Mary.
Yep.
Second, Manassas. Okay. So many of those battles, over 30% casualties combined, the highest of any battle in the Civil War for fighting casualties. So this is not some little bump in the road type, thing.
No.
This isn't a skirmish. This is a pretty important battle.
It is, yeah. And it seems so, it's kind of one of the more obscure ones. The one thing I came away from it was wanting to definitely learn more about Rosecrans, because this is one where this is not the Rosecrans we're going to see at Chickamauga. That's for sure. This is a completely different old Rosie, I guess, as he was called.
He's an interesting dude, Rosecrans. I mean,
you know what?
I mean, we'll talk about him on the political side of him.
Yeah.
And he was kind of somebody who was, a very popular guy going through, that he basically was kind of put in the corner, as you like to say, Mary, right? So
put in the corner by Grant.
He's certainly, Rosecrans, the guy who, he's from Ohio. So, okay, well, there you go with that. West Point class of 1842. He was a former inventor, Mary. And did you know he was, his face was burnt. I'm sure you know this, in 1859 by an oil lamp.
Yep.
So he kind of gave him that permanent little grin he had, like the Joker. He always had that grin, right?
Yep.
And he was somebody who upset his family when he converted to Catholicism. He was the family of Protestants, and he pissed them all off with that. But he's a guy militarily who was very interesting, and we'll talk more going through this. But he was very, very popular, and Lincoln loved him. A lot of guys did. He had those wins at the Battle of Iuka and the Battle of Corinth, right? And we talk about Grant as we talk about Chattanooga, and it seemed that the more these guys won, the more jealous he got, right?
Yeah.
So Grant, he had an issue with the Iuka, with that whole situation with him being drunk and going to that Cincinnati newspaper.
Yeah.
But Grant hated Rosecrans, and Rosecrans frankly hated Grant. They just didn't like each other,
He did. Before we go any further, though, we forgot to talk about our beverages.
Oh, that's right. Speaking of drinking, what that's called a segue, Mary. What are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking Surround Sound Lotus by Collective Arts Brewery, and I'm drinking it out of my General George Henry Thomas mug because General Thomas is at this battle tonight that we're talking about tonight.
Okay. I'm drinking Skyward Huckabee by Devil's Purse here on the Cape. Nothing better than a good Devil's Purse. And drinking out of my North Civil War Champions mug. So speaking of that, because they won the battle, don't want to jump ahead. But Devil's Purse, Mary, can't beat that.
Nope.
Cannot beat that at all. So real quick about Rosecrans, right? Let's just talk about him real quick.
Yep.
Grant and him just didn't get along. They just didn't. I think Grant obviously had issues with him because of his popularity. The other issue too was Stanton hated him. Then again, Stanton freaking hated everybody.
Stanton hates everybody.
Then everybody hates Stanton. It's kind of like that show, Everybody Hates Raymond, whatever that show is, right? Is that what it was?
Everybody loves Raymond.
Oh, well, all right. Well, I guess
everybody hates Rosecrans.
You go and just edit that one right out there. But Rosecrans was a Democrat in a sea of Republicans. Yes. We talked about this a little earlier today, Mary, was a lot of these guys, when it came down to who was going to get the glory, these Republican people knew that whoever came out of this war was going to have the inside track to probably running for president, and eventually would be Grant. So a guy like Rosecrans, who was a Democrat, he was somebody who, just didn't understand, he wasn't part of the Republican-controlled government that they all seem to have. And it seemed like they did whatever they could to knock him down. Now, he's going to fuck up throughout this. We're not going to sit here and tell you Rosecrans is the greatest thing since canned beer here either. But he's somebody who definitely was undermined, as a lot of the Democratic generals were. And so as we talk about this battle, you got to go back into the mindset of what was going on at the time, not just in the West, but this is where those other battles are spilling into. In the national mood and the morale of the North. It seems like whenever we do this, we're talking about the low morale of the North. But that's how it was, though, right?
Exactly, it was. And the other thing, too, it's like Rosecrans is one of these guys that he falls into the same thing that kind of Howard does, too, where when you think of Rosecrans, you think Chickamauga.
Howard? Oh, Howard?
I've got my reference in for this episode. Thinking about how to do that all fucking day, and I did it.
Okay, well, if you had 4 minutes, you won. So.
Anyway, so he's one that if you look at his earlier career, he does have a lot of success. And as you said, Darren, he's basically undermined, because he's a Democrat and Grant doesn't like him. And Grant is the ultimate victor in the Civil War. So in a way, Grant gets to write the history of it.
He does, and we'll talk about that towards the end, how this whole thing goes. But just check out what's going on in the North as we get into late 1862, right? They're coming off of defeats at Holly Springs and the fiasco with General Sherman at Chickasaw, right?
What a
over the Vicksburg era. Not to mention Fredericksburg had just taken place about 3 weeks before that. So things are low. Lincoln really needs, we said this before all the time, Lincoln needs a win, right? Kind of like Antietam. But he needs a win because he knows that Emancipation Proclamation is about to kick in January. So the only victory he has is kind of that small battle down there in Prairie Grove in Arkansas, and that just ain't gonna cut it. So he needs something. So what is he gonna do? He's gonna put all his hopes in that 14th Corps that's currently operating in Tennessee, and he's gonna hope for the best with that. They're coming off of the Battle of Perryville, which was theoretically was a Union victory, and it was a situation where it was kind of like a Mexican standoff, where you've got not Rosecrans, you've got Don Carlos Buell, who was shockingly slow, Mary, and he was going up against Bragg, and they just seemed to be staring at each other. You guys just seem to stare at each other all the time. That's all you do, and And so what happens is Lincoln's finally going to get fed up, and he's going to basically say, I need an aggressive guy, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring in Rosecrans. And Rosecrans is going to come in, but he's going to give him the directive, I'm going to put you in office and position in command, but you better go get Bragg now, because if you don't, I'm going to pull your ass out too. So you better do it.
Yeah, and as you said, it is called the 14th Corps. In some sources, though, you'll see it called the Army of the Cumberland.
Yep. Well, it'll get changed after the battle. They'll change the name.
It'll change, but some sources just refer to it as the Army of the Cumberland as well, which is just interesting how there's that kind of interchange with it. But yeah, as you said, Rosecrans is going to come in, and Lincoln is basically like, you need to get your fucking ass in gear and get after Bragg. And as for Bragg, he has, after, Perryville, he has like evacuated the dance floor from Kentucky because he's decided that it is not feasible for him to keep his army there because he can't feed them. As it is, they're on very low rations. So he decides that he's got to get them into Tennessee, and his plan is to get them to Murfreesboro, which is basically agriculture heartland of that area. But he's got to get them over the Cumberland Mountains.
He didn't do that, but there's also political reasons. Murfreesboro is the hotbed of pro-secession.
Exactly.
Right. So, the place he picked in Murfreesboro was not a good place for battle. Okay, it's flat land with very few undulations. Mary, it's got a few. Okay, got that in there. It's got some rock outcroppings. It's got that river, but it's a bounty. I mean, it's a place he could feed his army. And Bragg didn't think he was going to get chased. He thought he was going to be able to camp there for the winter, and he was going to be able to restock. And that's kind of how it was. But speaking of Bragg, just to introduce him again, we've talked about him in some detail, but he's a North Carolina guy, West Point, class of 1837. He married into a rich North Carolina family. He was a sugarcane planter there for a while, and great pro-secessionalist. And we mentioned earlier, he's somebody who had a lot of medical issues. He suffered from rheumatism, whatever that is. He had bad migraines with like somebody I know. He had some hemorrhoid issues, so we got a case of the Savannahs, and but because of that, he was sensitive to people, these soldiers in the hospitals. He'd visit hospitals. He would basically do that, but it also made him kind of crotchety.
Yeah, he was grumpy.
He was a very disciplinarian guy.
I had like migraines and the other shit he suffered from. I might be a little bit grumpy too.
Yeah, no, you probably would.
I already have to deal with you, right? So.
Well, that's true. There's a pain in the ass right there. So, but the thing militarily, he was a very uncreative tactician. He was a guy who just liked to do frontal assaults all the time. He wasn't a big flanking type guy, so he lost a lot of guys. But you know what though about him though, Mayor? He never bitched, he never complained, he never whined, and that's probably why Davis liked him so much. He would do as he was told and never questioned it. Now, when we talk more about some of these subordinates he had, apparently all they did was bitch and complain. That's
all they did, right? Like Polk and Kirby Smith,
and so he, we'll talk about those guys, but he had a lousy situation with that. So we'll talk about those guys, but just to show the players on the dance floor here real quick. So you mentioned before the 14th Corps, or the Army of the Cumberland, as they have been recently christened by you a few minutes ago. So we'll talk about who they are. There's a lot of familiar names with this too. So very similar to Fredericksburg, the corps were split up basically into wings. Okay, the left, the center, and the right. The left wing is by a guy named Major General Thomas Crittenden, who we had a lot of fun with him. He's a Kentucky-born guy. His brother,
drunk.
He's a drunk. His brother George was a Confederate general, Mary, in the Confederate Army. But you said a hard-drinking guy. And just like somebody I know, he gets drunk and likes to sing, apparently.
He does. And one time he got drunk with his men and he sang Mary Had a Little Lamb.
He did, and it made him a hero. He would go on to become governor of Kentucky down the road. His son, John, actually died with Custer, a little bighorn, which is kind of a too bad situation, but that was the case. So that's the left wing. On the right wing, he's got Alexander McCook, who is an interesting cat in his own right, Mary. So
the Fighting McCooks of Ohio.
The Fighting McCooks, one of the 4 Union generals fighting from Ohio to West your point, class of 52 from West Point, a veteran of the Indian Wars. He actually taught military tactics at West Point, and he fought at Shiloh and places like that. But you know what, though? He was not a very respected guy. One of the guys we'll hear about later on, Brigadier General Samuel Beatty, called him, I quote, a chucklehead, which is a great insult to call somebody in the 1800s. That sounds like a normal one now. Yep. Sherman called him juvenile. His soldiers referred to him as Gut because of his belly. Okay, well, heard that before.
That's rude.
You know? I mean, they called him Gut. Okay, so I don't know, whatever. But you know what? He was also another drinker, and he swore a lot, told great stories. So hey, funny parties. You know,
he sounded like he would have been fun at parties because drinking, swearing.
You know, but speaking of no fun, Mary, we got to talk about the guy who ran the center, which was all business. George Henry Thomas, GHT. So we've talked a lot about him. So Virginian. His family hated the fact that he sided with the Union from Virginia. His sister said he was dead to her.
And they turned his portrait that was on the wall. They turned it around on the wall. Mm-hmm. So then when people came over, they would be like, "Oh, who's that?" And they were like, "That's my a-hole brother who's fighting for the Union."
I mean, that's how it was, but but he was the most trusted subordinate of Rosecrans. So they got along really, really well. Mm-hmm. There's that story. I mean, he's a brave dude. He got shot in the face with the arrow in Texas with the Indian Wars and pulled it out. And kept fighting.
Going.
And he kept going. I mean, that's you know. And he was a guy who Lincoln almost chose to command this army in the 14th Corps.
He did.
But he ultimately settled on Rosecrans. But Rosecrans at the time was a rising star. But Thomas liked him. He didn't feel slighted. This wasn't like a Hooker Burnside situation.
Exactly. It's a testament to, I think, how their friendship was, and it's very similar to that of Grant and Sherman, where Sherman technically could have been in charge over Grant, but he didn't want it. So I think when you're looking at somebody like Rosecrans and Thomas, you're looking at a friendship that was a lot like the Grant and Sherman friendship that you see later on in the world and is very famous. The way these two work together at this battle is very similar to that. And I think it's one of these friendships that doesn't get looked at too often. But I was thinking about that too when he's passed over for command, and he just he accepts it because they're friends and he respects them.
And that friendship will come out later on as this battle goes, but it's pretty rare because we talked before about the rivalries and the little petty shit that goes on in these battles, and these guys seem to flip that. But as we flip the coin, Mary, on the other side, it's a little different story as we talk about these Confederate guys. Okay, so we talk about Bragg, okay, and we mentioned before how all his problems are behind him, and his core guys. He's going to have Leonidas Polk. We've talked about him before, and he was. Going back to the whole thing again, he was a pain in the ass to Braxton Bragg, Mary. Okay, he was, and I don't mean the hemorrhoids. I mean, he just was a guy who made his life difficult.
The fighting bishop.
Yep, he was a West Point guy. He would later go to the Virginia Theological Seminary. He moved to Tennessee, where he became one of the biggest slave-owning people in the state. Very pro-secession, pro-slavery. Helped create the University of the South. I believe it's in Sewanee. I think that is down there.
Yep.
To educate the elite of the South so they wouldn't have to go to schools in the North. Okay. But he was someone who was very much close with Davis again. But he's a guy who just didn't get along with Bragg. They just didn't get along. This is the guy who invaded Kentucky in 1861 and kind of almost, that's a border state, and he almost flipped that against the Confederacy. It wasn't that great at Shiloh or Perryville. But he was the one who helped organize, we'll talk about this in a second, that anti-Bragg cabal, I guess you want to call it.
Between him and Kirby Smith, they were the two instigators behind it.
And this is very similar to what we talked about with Chattanooga, where here we are again, they're getting together behind Bragg's back to get him bumped and replaced with Joe Johnston. So the other side, the other core is William Hardee. He's a Georgian from the class of 1838 from West Point. Graduated 26th in his class out of 45, so he was right in the middle pretty much. Nothing great. Another favorite of Jeff Davis. He did write that book about a tactic. He basically stole a book from France and made it his own.
He just translated it.
Yeah, it was a book called Hardee's Tactics, which is the best known drilling book probably in the entire Civil War. And that's actually one of the things that Pettigrew noticed about the cavalry at Gettysburg was how they would drill was from that book. So he bought the book. He didn't just write them, Mary. He wrote them. He read them too. But he was friendly with this anti-Bragg group, but he wasn't part of it. He was just kind of like that kid in high school who didn't want to piss anybody off, so he stayed in the middle, kind of like a Switzerland situation.
Kind of like how I was.
Oh yeah, inside that locker.
Yep.
But he was also, he was kind of a guy. He liked to dress well. He liked to drink the wine, liked to socialize. So a lot of the generals looked at him as kind of like that pretty boy type thing.
Yeah,
He,
which is funny because his best friend, and Simmons mentions this in the Claiborne biography, you could not have asked for two polar opposites to be best friends, Hardy and Claiborne, because Hardy is a bit of a playboy, and Claiborne is he's super shy around women to the point where he doesn't go to John Hunt Morgan's wedding, which happens during Murfreesboro, where he's like, no, I'm just going to stay back.
well, not a bad time to talk about the old Confederate wedding there before we get the battle started here.
Oh, yeah.
So old John Hunt Morgan, who also spent some time in Ohio, unfortunately for him, and he got himself married that weekend.
Yeah.
What a time, huh? What a time!
Yep.
What a time to be alive for John Hunt Morgan.
Maddie Ready.
Maddie Ready. She was ready.
Ready.
She was ready. But but yeah, interesting wedding party there. They're about to they're about to fight a battle. They didn't know the battle was coming.
Yeah.
But you've got the groomsmen would be
Braxton Bragg, Hardy, and Breckenridge, and then Polk did the ceremony. And I think the only reason Claiborne was not standing up with them is Claiborne was back. He was near Franklin that night, and he was just like, no, I'm going to stay back. I'm not going to go.
Well, duck weddings we don't want to go to. I can't imagine how that was. But again, but just talking about the whole battle, we talked a little bit before. This is post October 62. This is post Perryville. So Braxton Bragg is thinking he's going to go down to Murfreesboro and he's going to chill. He's going to fill up his coffers. He's going to live off the land. He's going to winter on the Stones River. And he's basically going to just kind of hang out there and just didn't think he was going to be attacked. Obviously, he didn't realize that Rosecrans was going to be put in power with the directive to go get that ass as soon as possible. And so as we go on with this stuff, we can kind of, as we get into December, understand. But that area around Stones River and Murfreesboro, it's like we said, it's not a great position, but it's a very politically important part of Tennessee. You cannot lose that part of Tennessee to the Union. It is very pro-slavery, very pro-secession. And it's one that, although it was not the best place to fight a battle, it was one that they really had to have, especially with that connection back to Nashville. Exactly.
One thing I want to mention too before you go any further is just about who's fighting on the Confederates and the cavalry is led by Joe Wheeler, but with him is a guy named Abraham Buford, and this is the cousin of General John Buford.
Yeah,
which I found that very interesting. But Bushrod Johnson is here too.
Bushrod is in the house. There must be some barns
nearby. He's in Claiborne's division.
Yeah. But the old war child rides again. This time he's got old Buford's with him, so that's pretty cool. There's a lot of people, obviously on the Union side, you have David Stanley, who was riding with him, was the great Robert Minty, Mary, who was with him.
Yes.
As well as Louis Zahn. So they had a pretty good cavalry as well. And while Bragg is in Murfreesboro, and while Rosecrans is moving down through Tennessee to come get him, he is going to have Wheeler try to picket him and just kind of just disturb the supply lines and just try to make life difficult for them in case they come down. Although Bragg does get surprised when he realizes that he's coming, because he doesn't think he's coming.
Yeah, no, he doesn't. He thinks he's home free for the winter and all that. And while he's there, so there's a lot of shit going on behind the scenes. So you have Kirby Smith and Polk separately going to Richmond and bitching about Bragg and saying you need to remove him from command. And then Bragg actually goes to Richmond to meet with Davis, and Davis is like, no, dude, I got your back. I'm going to keep you in charge. Meanwhile, you have Polk saying, put Joseph E. Johnston in charge. So what Davis does is he keeps Bragg in charge, but he sends Johnston, once he's recovered from his wounds, he sends Joseph E. Johnston out to look after kind of the Mississippi area. And all Johnston is going to be doing is just basically, if troops need to be shuffled from one place to the other, he's going to be doing that. And there actually ends up being some troops taken from Braxton Bragg when he's visited on December the 16th by Jefferson Davis. It's decided at this time that he's going to take 7,500 men from him. So he's going to lose Carter L. Stevenson's division. And he's going to go help out at what is beginning to be the Vicksburg campaign at this time.
That's a big loss, because Stevenson, we saw at Chattanooga, he was a hard-fighting guy in Lookout Mountain, and Bragg was pissed. He was pissed off. Davis also promoted John Hunt Morgan. Maybe it was a wedding gift, who knows, but he got promoted during that same visit, and he smooths off all that bullshit political stuff against Bragg. But understanding the concept. So it clearly goes to show that Davis probably had no intention of thinking that there was going to be any sort of offensive from Rosecrans or Buell, because they didn't know who was in charge at that point. To take 7,500, 8,000 guys from that army and really weaken them, I mean, that's one of those what ifs we were going to talk about earlier, right?
Mm.
About, especially we'll see later in this battle as we get into January, they really missed those guys at that point. They really did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're not really, like, compared to the Union, like, Rosecrans is bringing about, what is it, like 40,000 guys, because he's left half of his force back at Nashville and kind of dispersed all over the place just in case something happens.
Mm-hmm.
But still, like, Braxton Bragg is going to go into this battle with 35,000 guys. So there's a little bit of an outnumbering there, but
it's pretty close.
Rosecrans didn't bring his entire force, which he could have. He could have brought more men.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So we hinted before Lincoln. He's pissed off at Buell for not doing anything. So he does put Rosecrans in charge, with the assumption you're going to attack quick. Rosecrans does sit on his ass, Mary, after Christmas. He doesn't move, even after Lincoln tells him to, till the 26th of December, which is a couple of days ago, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And so he's going to march his entire three wings, the right, the center, and the left, down to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. As we mentioned before, Wheeler is going to kind of pick at them a little bit. And when Rosecrans finally does arrive, he does arrive piecemeal. He's going to set up north of the town. And then basically, Bragg is going to find out he's there. And because these guys are in camp, they're in their camps, not in any sort of defensive position. So as we lead into the end of 1862, the clouds are they're starting to grow. There's going to be a battle, and then a battle that the Union knew was coming. The Confederates didn't think was coming, but this time the Confederates get to play defense on their own soil again. But again, they're in a bad defensive position. They're not in a situation where it's a place that's easy to defend, and that's going to show. Yeah,
and they're like, the two armies are basically just 700 yards from each other by the time they get set up on December the 30th.
So it's not much space at all.
No, there's not. Like it's to the point where they can hear each other's bands playing music, and this is what happens on the night of December the 30th. There's music played on both sides. So the North starts off by playing Yankee Doodle and Hail Columbia, and the South responds by playing Dixie. But then what they do at the end of the night is the North starts playing Home Sweet Home, and the South starts playing along with them.
The Motley Crue song?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Awesome. I love that band. But you know, I was reading the diaries. Rumor has it, Mary, that the last song they sang was "Call Me Maybe."
Really?
That's what I heard. That's what after the drinks were kicking in, they started singing that song. So
did Crittenden get up and start that one?
He might have. You know, Mary had a little beer. But again, we're getting to the end of December, and they're basically in a situation where they're both poised to attack. And so Rosecrans says, okay, on the morning of the 31st, we're going to attack the Confederate right. And that's going to be his plan. Bragg says, on the 31st, I'm going to attack the Union right. So they pulled the twinsies situation.
Yep.
And Bragg is going to plan to attack right first daylight, and Rosecrans is going to attack after breakfast. So right after, you can kind of see where this is going.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And the thing is like, they're not, like, the Union is, they're preparing for this, where they're preparing for what the plan is that Rosecrans has. But one of Phil Sheridan's brigade commanders, Joshua Sill, he's out patrolling, and he talks to his pickets, and his pickets are saying, there's a bunch of Confederates and they're massing over there. They're going to attack us in the morning. So Sill goes back to Sheridan and he says, dude, we got a fucking problem. So they go and they talk to McCook, and McCook is basically like, fuck off, go back to bed. There's nothing there. Kind of like Sherman at Shiloh when he tells that dude, take your damned regiment back to Ohio. There
are some good comparisons between Shiloh and Donelson at this battle, right?
There is.
Especially with the morning stuff and the breakfast stuff. And I always think of that Antietam guy with those dudes in the first Texas they didn't get a chance to eat breakfast too. But Donelson and Shiloh, basically what Rosecrans wants to do is speaking of Crittenden, he wants to send Crittenden, who was on the Union far left. He wants to send him across the river, the Stones River, which people think Mary is named after because there's stones in it. But it's actually named after a guy named Uriah Stone, a navigator who helped navigate the area. So there you go. So there's your trivia, right? But he sends Crittenden across the river, and he's going to help. He wants him anyway to help secure the heights and basically get on the Confederate right and basically flank them and be able to turn that right. That's what the plan is. Versus so McCook is going to be basically on the other side of the army, and he's going to basically they basically have an idea, Bragg, is how many guys the Union have. So Bragg wants them to think that most of the army is on the southern part of the battlefield. So he lights a bunch of campfires, a whole bunch, okay, to make it look like there are more guys there. And they're all just empty fires, okay? You know, that bear would not have liked that situation about the campfire, but that's another story, you know. But what's going to happen is Bragg is going to have a similar plan where he's going to basically send his army across. And what he's going to do is he's going to send it first light. So before, he's going to send Hardee, his second corps, with John Wharton's cavalry around the Union right. But he's going to get there earlier, and that's really where the battle starts.
Yeah, and that's where Sheridan, when you know McCook says to him, "There's no fucking guys there. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with it in the morning." Sheridan ends up going and readying his 5,000 man division, and it's a good thing he did because, like, spoiler alert, Sheridan is definitely the Union MVP in this battle.
Yeah. Well, Hardee basically is going to take John Wharton's cavalry. He's going to want to drive deep into the Union rear. Okay. And what he's going to do is he's going to take John McNown, we call McClown today, or correctly, his division of around 10,000 guys, and they're all going to attack at one time, all going to attack at once. The Union's still at breakfast. They're still in line for the, Egg McMuffin over at the Murfreesboro, McDonald's, and they're going to be caught by surprise. They're going to get their line pushed back about 3 miles from the railroad. Crittenden's attack on the other side basically starts and fails. Basically, once it gets going, Rosecrans is going to see his line of McCook getting pushed in. So
McCook comes to him and says, "You got to send me fucking troops because it's fucked." Yeah,
so he calls off that. McCook's line's falling apart. But then this is where Sheridan gets in, right? And Sheridan really, he gets a lot of credit for Cedar Creek, Mary. Sheridan does. Yep. This is probably where he does his best job. This
is compared to Cedar Creek. I think this is definitely where Sheridan shines. And he sees smoke the night before that could become a fire. And I think he helps to kind of put that fire out a little bit by what he does. Like McCook is basically telling him, like, there's nothing to worry about. And Sheridan's like, fuck that noise. I'm going to worry about it. And Sheridan that day, he's riding up and down the lines of his men. And he eventually has to do that because all 3 of his brigade commanders get killed.
He's got, including his buddy Joshua Sill.
Yeah,
right?
He gets killed pretty early in the battle.
He's going to lose Fred Schaefer and George Roberts. He's going to lose all 3 of them.
Yeah,
we'll talk about that. Jump ahead when he does that. But his division is going to get whacked. But he's going to basically be like the whipping boy, the speed bump. But it's going to ultimately save him. But Phil Sheridan basically, unlike the others, he gets up early and he prepares. So while these other guys are still basically having breakfast and still in camp, he has his guys up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, really, really early. So they get up, they do their yoga, have their coffee, then they get ready for their defense. So they're in position. So what happens is once these attacks start, he pushes back Jonas Withers, and he basically is going to really help, after getting pushed back, help stem that tide. That second wave is going to come when Benjamin Cheatham's going to hit, and there's rumors he's drunk. There's always a drunk guy.
There's always somebody drunk, right? This battle.
But apparently Ben Cheatham, he was slow and sluggish, and the word is he was drunk. Okay, fine. Hey, it was New Year's Eve day, right? You never know. And he's in Polk's Corps. So basically, you start to see this again. He's ordering these piecemeal attacks against Sheridan's front, right? So it kind of goes back to that whole mantra I mentioned earlier about Bragg with that frontal assault thing. So he's attacking the front, and he's taking heavy, heavy losses. Sheridan is slowly giving up ground, but after he holds on for about 3 or 4 hours, Mara, he just keeps holding on.
He does.
And he's basically going to lose a whole bunch of his guys, about a third of his guys, those 3 brigade guys we talked about. He's going to get pushed back to a place called the Slaughter Pen, which again is apparently at every battle.
Yep.
And it's a rocky hill with slight undulations.
Or rolling hills.
Rolling hills, either one. But he's going to end up losing about 30 guns. He's going to lose about 3,000 guys. And he's going to lose those 3 brigade guys, those commanders, which is a big loss. I mean, just a gigantic loss.
It's a very chaotic battle just because of this way that they're, just the fact that Bragg ends up sending Hardee in earlier and Rosecrans isn't expecting it, And because of that, it's an absolute massacre. But as I said, Sheridan is the MVP. Good for him for getting up early.
It was. And we talked before about like Fredericksburg, right?
Mm-hmm.
How Burnside never even went to the front, right? We talked about that.
Exactly.
Rosecrans does, right?
He does. He's out riding around. He's taking on the role that a corps or division commander would have, not the commander of a whole army, in that he's out riding around. He's shouting support to the troops and all that. Like he's right there in the thick of it, and he's showing a lot of leadership, and you can see why his men, he was so popular with them as he's out doing this.
He's out riding around with his chief of staff, Julius Garrosh.
Oh God!
And while he's riding around, a cannonball takes Garrosh's head clean off right next to him.
Yeah.
And there's Rosecrans with blood and brains all over him, and he's still charging out orders.
Yeah.
Garrosh probably didn't make it, but again, that's a situation where he's showing personal leadership in a situation. So that we mentioned before the popularity of Rosecrans. I mean, when you look at a guy like him, and this is a guy who did make mistakes, but once you step away from that Rosecrans bad, mantra that people see, and you look into this, he does everything he's supposed to do. Right?
He does.
He's
very good here. He's out with them, rallying them around. And the one thing he does that after he loses the guy whose head, what's his name? Julius
Garrosh.
So he was
Garrosh.
Garrosh. He was Garrosh. I'm not good. We're not going to get into teaching me how to pronounce shit right on this show because it won't happen. Anyway. Did you just tell me to shh?
I said garage.
Okay. Anyway, so the dude was, he went to West Point with him, and he was his friend. He's one of the reasons that Rosecrans converts to Catholicism, so they're obviously very close. But what Rosecrans does is that Rosecrans cuts all the buttons off of his own jacket and puts them in an envelope and carries them with him for the rest of his life.
Yeah, I mean, he was a guy. He was a soldier, right? He really was.
He was very affected. He was very affected by that death, even though he just kind of was like, whatever when it happened. But it did affect him a lot.
Later battle, I think you talk about the PTSD thing. As battles went on, these guys definitely lost their fastball, right? Think of a tire losing their tread. Mm-hmm. He gets through this, right? And then next thing you know, they're getting through, Tullahoma's coming.
Tullahoma, and then Chickamauga.
And then Chickamauga.
And you see Longstreet coming towards you.
And by then, and you know what though? That's when he lost Chickamauga, and that was it. And then you had Grant hovering over them, just waiting to kind of take over.
Yep.
I think, honestly, we'll talk more about these battles. I think Rosecrans did well, Mayor.
He does really well here.
It's skewed a little bit because he fights Bragg a lot. Yeah. But again, a battle like this, Bragg didn't do badly.
No, he didn't.
Right?
And the thing is like this Rosecrans that I'm reading about in this battle is not the Rosecrans that sees that sea of blue coming towards him when the breakthrough happens at Chickamauga, followed by the sea of gray, and is like, fuck that, and just retreats. But what it did make, like studying this also made me see the friendship between Rosecrans and Thomas. And now I get that when that happened at Chickamauga, that Thomas knew exactly what to do. And that's why, because of that friendship.
I think the battle fatigue and the stress and the pressure and everything. I mean, thank God. I mean, I can't imagine going through this where you're losing people. You watch your chief of staff get his head blown clean off right in front of you.
Which is what happened to Sherman at Shiloh as well. That same thing happened to Sherman at Battle of Shiloh. He was out riding around in the morning.
But they sewed his head back on though, because I saw he was late because he made that march later. So no, I know, but I mean, but but the point is how much can a person take?
Exactly.
Right? How
Yeah.
much watching people you're in charge of be killed en masse because of your decisions?
Yeah.
Of course. I mean, that's why there's a shelf life for these guys. That's why these guys don't last that long.
Mhm.
But looking back at this whole thing again, so basically Rosecrans is in a situation. He's riding along. He sees Garrosh get his head cleaned out, and now this assault's going on. Sheridan is beating the pulp out of these Confederates too.
Mhm.
I mean, he's getting pushed back, but he's defending. So Polk finally says, something, this ain't gonna be. So he finally tells Cheatham and Withers to just stop.
Yep.
Okay. Sheridan's gonna fall back to organize, and this is kind of the mistake he makes though. Is he falls back to catch his breath, and this is where Cleburne takes advantage.
Yeah, Cleburne here is absolutely relentless, and he's as much as Sheridan. So much as Sheridan is the MVP for this battle for the Union, Cleburne is the MVP for the Confederates for this battle. So you have both MVPs. They're going to go at each other in this battle, and like his men, like Cleburne's men, are going over terrain that is very difficult. So there's limestone rocks, there's cedar trees, there's like things sticking out from the ground and all that. And they can't.
Are there clowns?
There might be. Well, there's McClown, as we talked about. And Cleburne said, like, this is earlier in the morning. So this is like around 9:00. Like Cleburne said afterwards that the fight was short and bloody, lasting about 25 minutes when the enemy gave way.
Yeah.
And finally at 9:00, Cleburne's got to stop, reorganize, and then he's told by Hardee to push the enemy and don't give them time to rally. And this is when Cleburne almost makes it to the Nashville Turnpike.
Well, this was the mistake they made, the flaw in the game plan,
Yep.
The pain in the ass with this whole thing, right? Was one of the things that they were so focused on with having guys like Wheeler, the war child, right?
Yep.
Is destroy the communications, the supplies. So if the Union has to retreat, they got to go to East Tennessee, and they're going to be cut off from the supplies, and they're going to be cut off from Nashville, and they got him. They're driving this army right towards the communication hub, the National Railroad.
Yeah, they are.
And what that's doing is it's allowing the Union to basically have a small, tight defense around their target. So there's no way they're going to get away from there. So that instead of driving them away from the railroad, their target, what they're doing is driving them towards it. And this is the one. And this isn't just on Cleburne. This is because that's where Sheridan happened to fall back.
Exactly.
But what it does, it's if you're trying to get someone away from the capture of the flag, you don't push them towards the flag. And that's what Bragg and what these Confederates did. Ultimately, it's going to be what their big failing is, their big mistake with this. But it was a huge way this whole battle played out.
Well, but this was something too that it's like they almost had it, and it's very much like what happens to Meade at Fredericksburg. Like when he broke through Stonewall Jackson's lines, and he doesn't have backup. This is what happens to Cleburne. And Cleburne said in his after-battle report that he was almost on the Nashville Turnpike in the rear of the original center of Rosecrans's army, sweeping with their fire the only line of communication with Nashville. But it was not after 3, and my men had little or no rest the night before. They had been fighting since dawn without relief, food, or water. And that's when Rosecrans brings in reserves. And Cleburne's men just have to retreat, because at some point, and you see this happening at Antietam, and this is what happens with Meade's men at Fredericksburg. You can't do it anymore.
Do you know the Confederates, at that very moment you just talked about, Mary, who they could have used right there? Carter Stevenson.
Yep.
Right? That's why sending them to Vicksburg was the mistake. At the very moment Cleburne needed the most, he ran out of guys. It's like so many of these battles, they missed that one, they lacked that one division. It's like Pickett's Charge, the PPT, right? They missed that one division that can put them over the top. So when Cleburne exploits that gap, and he's going to have to fall back because he's running out of steam, that's when he misses Stevenson. And that is that's not on Bragg. That's on Jefferson Davis.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's exactly what, like, Hardee says that in his after battle report. He says, if at that moment a fresh division could have replaced Cleburne's exhausted troops and followed up that victory, the rout of Rosecrans's army would have been complete. So I can't imagine, like, you're that close. You're that close to getting that road to Nashville.
The other mistake he did that Bragg made that I am going to put on him, though, is he was afraid of Rosecrans attacking where Bragg was.
Mhm.
Okay. So he kept Breckinridge on the other side of the river. And when he couldn't, and that attack was never going to come, at least he didn't think it was going to come, he could have used those troops and put them towards the primary part of the battle. So really you have really two gigantic forces that he held back. One that was not his own fault, but one was his. But at the end of the day, you run out of numbers, and you realize you have people on the dance floor that aren't dancing, right? And some people are off the dance floor. So that's the problem. You know, one of those bad songs that comes on and people don't dance. That's what happens. So, but they could have used them down in that area. So it limited the numbers, the main attack that he could have used once Cleburne explored that gap.
Yeah, and
Right?
yeah, they couldn't do it without, you know, they needed Stevenson's troops, but just like you said, like Breckinridge has been like waiting for an attack all day, and by the time he's going to be sent in, it's far too late. And it, like, Cleburne's men are just told to hold the ground where they're at.
Well, now Breckinridge will get involved a couple hours later, so around dinner time, by 4 or 5 o'clock or so on the 31st. Breckinridge, we mentioned him a handful of times. He's a former vice president, Mary. He only joined the Confederacy when he found out Lincoln was going to arrest him.
Yep.
So that was a good reason to get the hell out of Dodge. He was going to be arrested for protesting the war, apparently. But he's an aggressive dude. He's a guy, but basically he finally is going to get redeployed from that Confederate right to the center. He's finally going to get it to break through Rosecrans' line. But again, it's piecemeal. By then, the Union was basically entrenched. They were in that round forest area called Hell's Half Acre.
Yep.
Was what they call it. So it sounds like a real fun place to go. But basically, this is where William Hazen's going to show up. Okay, and William Hazen, he's in Crittenden's wing, so he's a hard-fighting dude. He's going to basically push Breckinridge back, and because Breckinridge has those half-assed attacks, those piecemeal attacks, he's finally going to get reinforced by Polk, but he's going to get pushed back over and over and over and over and over again. So as the day ends on December 31st, the final day of a bloody 1862, the Union's going to find themselves basically bloodied and bruised, but they're still breathing. Mm-hmm. And, this is going to go into the nighttime. So this is going to end the first day's battle at Stones River.
Yeah, and the one thing that Irving Buck, who was Cleburne's aide-de-camp, he wrote that Cleburne's troops felt that they had won a victory, the fruits of which had been lost from no fault of theirs. So Cleburne nobody is blaming him on what happened at all. And that's evident in what Hardy writes, what's evident in what Irving.
Just you to Cleburne.
Hey,
I'm just saying, just so you know, it wasn't Cleburne's fault.
No, I'm just saying they're running to his defense. And that's I'm setting it up for later on what happens with Braxton Bragg after this.
Oh, rope-a-dope. The old rope-a-dope. No, but you're right, though. You're right. But Cleburne, you know what, though? He does a fantastic job. But again, he's somebody who, if he just had a little more support, if he had Stevenson with him, or he had Breckinridge in the beginning, he might have had it. But again, he goes as far as he can, but kind of like Ambrose Wright at Gettysburg, kind of like,
Meade at Fredericksburg.
Right. They just lack that one division to put them over the top. And that's what happens. So
that happens a lot in the Civil War, though. You're lacking that one division.
Almost every battle, you're lacking the one division, and there's a slaughter pen.
Yeah.
Every battle.
And a sunken road.
And a sunken road, which is always good, especially when you get the Devil's Purse going. But basically, Rosecrans that night, he is going to have a council of war. Right, he's going to get his guys together, get the band together, and say, "Dudes, what do you want to do?" And this we get some pretty famous quotes that come out of this battle that you hear about later on. So he's going to get Thomas, the Rock of Plymouth, and he's going to get Crittenden together. He's going to say, "What do you want to do? What do you want to?" And you know what's so funny though is Meade gets criticized for this at Gettysburg, right? And there's almost so many battles like Rosecrans has these councils of war, and you never hear it except for Meade. But that's another story. So there's one for Gelzo for you right there. But he pulls them together and says, "Guys, what do you want to do? We're bruised, we're battered." Both Thomas and Crittenden want to stay and fight. Thomas has that great quote I just know you're dying to say.
Yeah, this army does not retreat.
Right, but then he goes, "But there's no better place to die." Yeah. So talk about a passive-aggressive comment right there.
It's like, I'm not making this decision, fucker. You're the commander.
We are not retreating, but we're probably going to die. And so, but they obviously decide not to give away the ending here. But obviously, they decide to stay. So Bragg, he's sitting at his, he's sitting back in Murfreesboro, and he's thinking, okay, I've got them where I want them. I've got this one. This is where, like, this is very similar to Beauregard at Shiloh, Mary, where he's going to sit there and he's going to telegraph Jeff Davis and say, and I quote, "The enemy has yielded his strong position and is falling back. We occupy the whole field. God has granted us a happy new year." So he thinks he thinks Rosecrans is about to evacuate the dance floor, Mary. He thinks they're retreating. And he's getting some bad intel, too, because Joseph Wheeler, who, if you remember, the war child, is around the backside as I'm pointing. I don't know where I'm pointing.
He's at the back door, is he?
He's the back door, right? But he's the back door, exactly. He's going to take him from the rear. And he is basically going to – and he sees the wagons of the injured leaving. And he's going to mistake those wagons for troops retreating. So he's going to report to Bragg that the Union's retreating. So Bragg's on a full assumption that these guys are out there going back and we've won. So when he telegraphs Davis, this isn't a going to take their shoes situation. This isn't a bravado thing. He really thinks it because the information he's getting. So at the end of the day, December 31st, you have that situation where both generals are sitting in their camps thinking they've won the battle, which is rare, right? Mm-hmm. How often does that happen? But that's what they're both thinking. But they're going to be surprised on New Year's Day when they wake up the next day.
Well, when Bragg wakes up and he's like thinking they're gone, and then he sees this line of blue and he's like, fuck.
He'd probably been like, fuck y'all, So he wakes up and he's surprised to see Rosecrans obviously still there. So this is when Polk says, dude, we got to get the fuck out of here. This is bad form. Someone's got to say rabbit on the first of the month, I think, because they get some bad luck right at the beginning.
And Bragg is like, fuck off, Polk, we're not leaving.
He's like, we're staying. I got these medical issues. I can't get up, so I'm staying right here.
And that's what he calls in Breckinridge.
He calls him, orders Breckinridge to basically, well, first, before he does, Rosecrans, he's going to renew that first day's assault. He's going to send a guy named Horatio Van Cleve, a great Starbucks cup name, by the way, right there.
That is.
For future, just future reference. He's a guy in Crittenden's army. Now, Cleve is not going to be there because Samuel Beatty of the Chucklehead fame is the one who's going to take over for this in this situation. So they're going to cross the river and they're going to get up across, and Bragg is going to see it, and he's going to send Breckinridge to basically go take care of Samuel Beatty. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. So Breckinridge knows this is a bad idea. This is a bad idea at Gene's commercial right here. Because the reason why is he knows Beatty's on that hill east of Stones River, and he's got a guy named Captain Mendenhill who has a beautiful, beautiful situation set up with 45 guns on this field, the cannon. Okay, I would say after East Cemetery Hill at Gettysburg on July 2nd, this is probably the most impressive artillery setup probably of the Civil War, in my opinion. So he has this whole field, kind of like Fredericksburg, where a chicken couldn't cross the field.
Yep.
He has the whole field set with his pendulum hoss and his ordnance glasses, the whole deal on these guns. They know, right? This is for real. So they're going to basically command this position with 45 guns. So Breckinridge, got to do what you got to do. So he's ordered in. He's going to go. And within an hour, they are going to get crushed. They're going to get their asses kicked by this artillery. He's going to last, like this 45 minutes to an hour. They're done. 1,000 guys gone. You've got that situation where you got those dudes from Kentucky. Those Kentucky guys, they get slaughtered.
The Orphan
Brigade. And Breckinridge is crying. He's saying, my poor orphans, as he's watching these guys get slaughtered.
And he argued with Bragg about that. And he said, no, they're going to be up there. The Union's already there. And Bragg's like, I know they're fucking not. So go in. You can't. Bragg's like, I have given an order and expect it to be obeyed.
Well, I think because he'd already sent that telegram and he didn't have that email retrieve, you can delete it. I think he sent that. So he's like, shit, I said we won this fucking thing. We got to
deliver. We have to deliver.
So it's like, because we saw what happened to Beauregard and Shiloh and Corinth. I can't. So he basically knew he had to do it. So he had to be aggressive. But they just get their asses kicked. And that's pretty much, the day kind of ends and there's not much going. January 3rd comes, so a couple of days later now, and Rosecrans is starting to receive reinforcements, right? Yeah. So he's getting more soldiers, he's getting supplies. So right off the bat, Wheeler, was failed because he had one job, didn't do it right. At this point, most of Bragg's subordinates are saying, "Dude, this is over. We gotta go. We gotta let's get the hell out of here."
Yep.
So finally, that night around 10 o'clock, Bragg says, "You know what? Roll them up. Let's go."
Yep, we're
So
leaving.
so they head to Tullahoma, which is about 40 miles south. And then it brings up that question with Bragg, right? So did he lose nerve, right? Or did he listen to his generals and agree with them, knowing his generals couldn't stand him? Was it a situation where he knew this was lost, or you know what I'm saying? Or did he feel like they were setting him up? That's where the politics comes in a little bit with this,
I
right?
think he felt like he was being set up,
Right.
because he, like, after that happens, like, the press completely is relentless on Bragg, rightly so. I mean, he's the reason this battle's been lost. But he writes this letter to all his commanders, basically saying, "Can you back me up? I'm being bashed in the press. Can you say that that you agreed with the retreat and all that?
Yeah,
And back me
so
up," like that. That's what he
he's
does. And so, like, Hardee gets this letter, Claiborne gets this letter. Polk actually doesn't get the letter because he's not there.
no, the stamp must have fallen off.
Yeah,
But
Breckinridge gets the letter, but the responses, other than Breckinridge's, are all pretty much the same.
yeah, he's hoping to get that "Can I get an amen?"
Yeah, or no, Cheatham. I'm
response.
sorry, Cheatham is the one that
Cheatham,
doesn't.
yeah.
Yeah, Cheatham. And Claiborne teases him about it for the rest of his life.
But but whether it is, I think in that situation, the fact that the supply lines were starting to get reinforcements,
Yeah,
they were done. They were done. And so he finally leaves. But you look at the body report on this one, and 24,000 total casualties. 13 U.S., 11 for the Confederates. It's a bloody blend. We mentioned before, there's 36% total casualties for the entire combatants, which is the highest in civil history.
Yeah, it's the highest
You know,
percentage when it comes to casualties and all that. And it's
so you're right. So you're gonna see Bragg head off to Tullahoma, which will be fighting another battle down the road. Okay, we'll be hearing about Tullahoma here soon. But this is where the politics starts, right? The post-battle stuff. So in the North,
Mhm.
it's hailed as a big, great victory.
Yeah.
It raised hopes in that part of the middle west part of the country. A lot of the anti-Lincoln sentiment was kind of settling a little bit now, because okay, fine. Just basically Rosecrans is getting national recognition at this point. He's a hero. Even Stanton says he did a good job.
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit, right? Praise from Caesar. He gets a little pub. But again, what happens at that point? And this is where Lincoln kind of misses a little bit, right? They realize the bloodying, Rosecrans does, that they took, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he and David Stanley, his cavalry guy, agree. We got to stay here, rest these guys, okay? Because these guys just got their asses beat. We won, but this was brutal. We're getting supplies. Let's just stay here, reform, catch our breath. It's wintertime, winter quarters. But again, so he doesn't pursue Bragg. And that's been the repeating thing over and over and over again with Lincoln, is you win a battle, but you don't pursue and don't finish. But this is where Lincoln misses the ball, misses the boat. He doesn't realize the condition of these guys at that moment. Right? They're not automatons or robots that they can just go ahead and go.
It takes a long time for Lincoln to learn that.
Right. Meanwhile, Polk and Bragg are pointing fingers at each other, blaming each other for the loss of the battle. They're bitching each other, all that.
Yep. I do have examples of some of the letters that were written about.
Good.
Yeah, about just so, like, Bragg, right? As I said, Bragg writes this this letter to all his. Hardee gets it, Breckinridge gets it, Cheatham, Claiborne. Basically, like, a lot of the high level command guys get it. And Bragg is saying, like, just verify my interpretation of the events and agree with me. Mm-hmm. And the only one that does, Cheatham is the only one that says, yeah, sure, that's what you did. But Hardee says, like, I feel that frankness compels me to say that the general officers are unanimous in their opinion that a change in the command of this army is necessary. In this opinion, I concur. And Breckinridge basically says the same thing. Like, they entertain the highest respect for your patriotism. It is their opinion that you do not possess the confidence of the army to an extent which will enable you to be useful as its commander. In this opinion, I feel bound to concur. And Claiborne says, they unite with me in personal regard for yourself and high appreciation of your gallantry and patriotism, and in conviction for your great capacity for organization. But at the same time, they see with regret, and it has also met my observation, that you do not possess the confidence of the Army in other respects in the degree necessary to ensure success. So you have Hardee, Breckinridge, and Claiborne all saying, fuck this. You can't command. And Davis, I'm sure, is well aware of this.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're looking at here with the Army of Tennessee is something that is going to rear its ugly head again at Chickamauga. Chickamauga was not the first time a petition happened. Chickamauga is not the first time this drama happens.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think if these letters had been said of any commander in the Union Army, he would have been gone.
The Northern Army had a lot less. Lincoln had a lot less tolerance than these guys did.
Yeah, Davis is like, dude, you can stay in. Don't worry.
Well, I think Davis liked Yes Men. To be honest, man, I think he liked the fact that Bragg didn't bitch. He didn't complain. He did his job. He He obviously had all kinds of issues. He was far from. We're not going to sit here and convince anybody Bragg is anything, but because he was a train wreck. But he had his moments, right? And he had his moments at Chickamauga, right? Mm-hmm. And he really didn't do badly here. I think this battle would have been a lot different if Davis didn't take Stevenson from him. Mm-hmm. I think that's a big loss. Now you can blame for Breckinridge for holding his guys, but he didn't know where the attack was coming from. But you take away, 8,000 guys. So you're the expert on math. What percentage is that, right? That's a lot of guys being taken away.
A lot. That's all I'm going to say.
Now, in hindsight, Vicksburg fell anyway, so that they didn't matter. But again, that's a big loss. But look at some of the post-battle ramifications for the North too, right? Now the North holds that fertile ground of mid-Tennessee now, mm-hmm. right? So now they got a supply line. They're going to hold Nashville, which is very, very important. Now mm-hmm. they don't have to worry about the Confederates being between them and Nashville. So they have that. The rebel position at that point in the West really never recovered at that point. And you mentioned before about the importance of this battle. This changed the landscape of the Western theater for the rest of the war.
It does, yeah,
and
absolutely.
You know what? No one knows that. Few people know that unless you study this battle.
Exactly. And that's why this battle is so important to study, because if this battle had been lost, the Confederates could have taken Nashville again, and they could have went back into Kentucky. That's
it, right. We played the what if game, which everybody meant. Let's pretend. Let's just go on this rabbit hole. Let the Confederates win Stones River. They take Nashville again. They're going to control that rail hub. How is that going to affect Atlanta? Right. If you can't get Atlanta, but Chattanooga, but then Atlanta. It's like dominoes. If you lose Nashville, you can't have Chattanooga. If you can't have Chattanooga, you can't have Atlanta. If you can't have Atlanta, you don't have that election.
Exactly.
Right? So there you go. So as the time goes on, these armies sit. They don't do a hell of a lot between January and June, admittedly. Bragg is going to rebuild the Army of Tennessee. He's going to basically just, he's going to be advised by Joseph Johnston to your point, just keep Bragg in command. Just keep him, mm-hmm. Rosecrans is going to basically take this opportunity to train his guys, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, a la McClellan, right? Lincoln's aggravated, but he's like, you know what, fuck it, I won. I got the Emancipation Proclamation coming out. I can finally have something to hang my hat on. Yeah. So he won, but I wish he'd get him, but I'm going to deal with this. I'm going to be cool. And then it goes on, later on in the year, the next year, Rosecrans is going to beat Bragg at Tullahoma. He's going to lose at Chickamauga. He's going to win at Chattanooga. But there's no big battles, and that's pretty much it. And as we eventually know, Rosecrans is going to basically be ignored. The Grant Halleck Stanton triumvirate of doom is going to come get him, and that's going to be the end of Rosecrans. Yeah. But Thomas will take over and stuff like that. But I think at that point, most of Rosecrans' achievements, and I know you hinted at this at the beginning, Mayor, most of Rosecrans' achievements are going to be basically overshadowed by Grant, right? To the point where they're going to be denied by Grant.
They are. And the one story about that is, so not long before Lincoln was assassinated, he gave Grant a list of all the battles that the Union Army had won. And Grant took a look at it and he said, Stones River was not a victory. Right there. Like Grant, when you start, I mean, I love Grant. I respect him. He's talented. But there are certain things about him that he's got a fucking agenda. And there's a reason why he and Sherman are remembered and men like Rosecrans aren't. Rosecrans, he deserves a bit more of a voice in history. And this is what this episode, researching this one, has made me realize, that Rosecrans had victories. And honestly, Rosecrans is one of the reasons that the March to the Sea was able to happen when you think about it, because they were able to hold that Nashville pike, right?
Well, Rosecrans, he slit his own throat when he went to that reporter at the Cincinnati Enquirer
Exactly.
about a year
Yeah,
ago.
he did.
Screwed. But you know what, though? He was a Democrat. Grant was going to come get him anyway. And then, the reality is Grant is the big victor of the war.
He
but
is.
I think a lot of that is by design.
It
right?
is. It absolutely is. It's kind of this, and you and I have called it the Union or Northern Lost Cause, where it's like
it's called you know what it's called? It actually has a name. It's called the Just Cause.
Yep, that's right.
It actually has a name.
Yep, I heard that today, and so it was a podcast I was listening to about this, and like. So that's why you have to kind of take a deeper dive and look at some of these figures a little bit more, because they're all factoring into this. The war was not simply won by Grant.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
like, well, what did Grant say? I know you mentioned this at the beginning. What did Grant say to Lincoln about Stones River?
It was not a victory.
He told Lincoln it was not a victory. And Lincoln, and to Lincoln's defense, he disagreed with him.
Mm-hmm.
He said, no, it was. But again, this kind of goes to show, we're not trying to bash on Grant,
no,
but I think you got to understand there's a pattern with this, right?
Yeah, like you look at Lookout Mountain and how he was that's romance.
Right.
Didn't happen.
And these guys on the other side of the political equation, and a lot of it plays into that. Mm-hmm. But I think the overall picture, as we mentioned before with Stones River, it was really the linchpin. It was the lymph node to the West, right? And it's important people need to study this battle, because if there was no Stones River, or if, more importantly, if the Confederates had won Stones River, and they could have, it was close.
Yeah, they were that close. This is like it was
right?
To me. It was a lot like Meade at Fredericksburg when he had broken Jackson's lines, and it was like if Meade had just had that backup, Fredericksburg might have went way different.
Well, you see Claiborne again. He's a superstar of this, but again, the Rebs lacked that one division because Carter Stevens got sent to Vicksburg, and who knows, right? Like the what if game. This is a real what if, though. This isn't one of those stupid what if Stonewall was at Gettysburg bullshit things. This is a real what if.
This is one that makes you realize like how everything falls into place, because you think about it. If the Union loses Stones River, all those troops that are up the Mississippi at Vicksburg, or however geography works, maybe they were down. I don't know. I'm not sure.
It was funny watching you point, though, because whatever.
Anyway, what if they had lost and they had to fight at Nashville to try and win Nashville back? What troops might have got pulled from the Vicksburg campaign from the Union to do that?
Yep.
So it's all these, like, it's this huge thing that had they lost this, things could have been a lot different. The war could have been a lot different in the West. And I think that's why this is a really important battle to study, for that reason, but also to look at it as Rosecrans as a commander and see that he did have talent. He is not just who he was at Chickamauga. He's actually quite a talented commander. He's in a way, he's like the McClellan of the West.
Yeah.
How he's loved by his men. He's a Democrat.
He's focused on training, preparation. Yep. He doesn't want to attack if necessary. But though he gets the order from Lincoln, and he sits on it for a little bit. But once he gets going, he goes and he wins that battle. He goes on to win Tullahoma. But I think the tread was running off his mental tires, Mary. I think by the time he got to Chickamauga, I think he just about had it. There's only so much humanity, people, how much stuff the human brain can take.
The other thing too that factors into Chickamauga is that when he was sitting there watching that breakthrough happen with Longstreet, he was going off no sleep for 3 days.
Yeah.
And
these are the things that the books don't tell you. These are the things that it's tough to imagine, right? Is just put yourself in that situation, right? All that pressure. But at the end of the day, that's how they use these generals. You wear them out, you
Yeah.
use them, you discard them, go on to the next guy. And that's just the way it was. At the end of the day, it all worked out. But I think anybody who really wants to get into a really good study about not just the what if, but a tactical attack, just going to Stones River, because it's a great study, and it's one that not a lot of people study.
Interesting, and it's
you know?
to me, it has become up there with the like a lot of the other more like the battles that are really studied. It's one that's worth studying. And the one thing that I just thought of now is the situation where we're in, where we can't do our usual thing on New Year's Eve, be with who we want to be, go out to parties, whatever. Not that I'm the type of person to do that anymore on New Year's Eve. Keep in mind that night at Stones River, there are men sleeping on the open ground without their tents.
Mm-hmm.
Like Claiborne's men had left all their stuff back at their original camp. They sleep that night on the cold ground. No tents, no blankets, and they can't have fires. And they also don't have food.
Ben Cheatham may drink all the alcohol, so that was the other problem. Something they had nothing, so it ruined everything. But anyway, I think it's a good study. I think it's a good thing. Yeah. So I think as we move on to the next thing, so we can talk about some coming attractions, Mary, as we move on from Stones River. So we will move on to our next live, which is in 2021. So Mary, I will see you next year.
You will.
Next year. So we will talk about that. We'll talk about Stones River. Anybody else who wants to talk about it. Again, the new website is up.
Yep.
CivilWar.com. So check it out. You can subscribe to it. And we'll send you all kinds of fun newsletters and all kinds of other things we'll do.
Yep. I'm working on a newsletter, hopefully to go out in early January. That's one thing we want to be doing.
We'll do that.
We have our book club that we've chosen the books. So if you want to know what books are involved in that, you can check our Twitter feed to find that out. But probably quicker just to visit our website. And if you're interested in joining our book club, just send us an email, civilwarbreakfastclub@gmail.com. Our first book is going to be Black Iron Mercy, and we will be meeting via Zoom at the end of March to discuss that. But for those that can't meet via Zoom or can't make that meeting, we are going to be talking about something soon that will have a way for you to be able to interact and talk about that book with us. So we don't want anybody to be excluded from this book club. However you can make it. If it's not via Zoom, then we're going to come up with some other ways for you to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and we've had a lot of people sign up for this. I think it's going to be a good one. So read the book. It's a great book by Eric Schleinlein. I think I pronounced his last name. I feel bad for pronouncing his last name, but I just can't. It's like you with Massachusetts. I just can't say it.
Massachusetts?
Ooh, not bad. But I think it would be a lot of fun. So, Mary, I think this was a great time, a great discussion as always. Always fun to talk about about Clayburn and all your favorite heroes. Somehow you even got Howard involved, which I don't know how you did that, but you got him involved. So anyway, our next discussion will be next week, and we are talking about.
I think we're either doing Mud March or Chickasaw Bluffs. We're either in the Eastern or the Western Theater.
I didn't mean to catch you off guard. I just assumed since you actually made the coming attractions list. I figured you probably know.
I know, and I'm like, my brain is fried for something.
Give you too much credit for that, But I promise you. Oh, stop! I promise we'll be doing another one next week. So whatever it's going to be. So you know what? We'll check out the coming attractions too. We'll all find out together. So
what we're recording next week.
So good stuff. So Mary, again, the pleasure. I hope you had a great Christmas. Hope you had a great couple of days, couple of time off, everybody. Hope you had a safe time. So by the time this drops, it'll be a new year. I know everyone's so sad to see 2020 finally go.
Yeah.
But we are on to 2021, as a football coach in my area likes to say, from a team that I will not mention right now because I'm not happy. But we will talk about some new things going into 2021. So any final words from you, Dairy Queen of Kincardine?
The one thing I wanted to say is that when Bragg woke up on New Year's Day, 1863, and saw that blue line of Union men, he totally got 2020'd.
Ooh, wow. And then he got Savannah'd.
Because he said that. He's like, it's a happy new year indeed to Davis. And he wakes up in the morning and he's like, fuck.
Ah, well.
He got 2020'd.
Poor Braxy. But anyway, so we will catch up with you all. Thanks for watching this. Hope you enjoyed it, and we appreciate, as always, all the support. So we look forward to talking to you soon, and have a great New Year. When we'll see you at the live on Saturday, Mary.
Yep. See you all later.
Peace out.
Bye.